Great, thank you very much. Imagine this person walking and rushing to a hospital under a burning African sun after being bitten by a venomous snake, but without really knowing if he or she will get treated with the adequate antivenom on time, if there will be the necessary capacity to save her or his life. This is the harsh reality of thousands of people living in sub-Saharan Africa, where many of them tragically die on the road to the hospital or at the hospital itself. This is why the World Health Organization, and as part of the WHO roadmap on snakebite and envenoming, we have really put improving access to safe and effective antivenoms as a top priority. Interestingly, deploying drug stockpiles has proven highly successful for different treatments and drugs for NTDs, and also for vaccine distribution and uptake. And the good news are that WHO has a lot of experience managing large stocks of products and distributing them across the world in the context of health emergencies and health crises. So over the next minutes, and I'll try to keep this short, I'd like to basically take you through these key questions that we have been trying to address with our colleagues at the NTD department, which are really the basis of starting a stockpile program on antivenoms in sub-Saharan Africa. And some of these key questions, and we have many others, but here are some highlights. It's first of all, how to design a stockpile program on antivenoms for sub-Saharan Africa. Secondly, what evidence, and I think this really is the core question that we've been working on. What is the evidence? What type of information, what type of data do we need to inform and to define and design a stockpile model? What type of product are we going to start with? But later, what other products do we plan to include? Which snake species are we going to cover? And more importantly, at the end, what is the population that is ultimately going to benefit from such a stockpile program? So this work involves many colleagues and different teams and different groups at WHO, of course, the NTD department, but also colleagues at PQ, and very interestingly, also our colleagues from the WHO GIS Center for Health, which was very recently created and launched in WHO and working already in many different large international projects, but also supporting us in basically giving us access to the latest data sources and data layers in different components. You'll see this in a minute, but also bringing cutting edge expertise in terms of data analysis, data visualization, and really using some top software that I'll show you in a minute. And the project, as you heard from my colleague David Williams before, has multiple phases. This is really the phase one of the project, where we are trying to understand the landscape, right? And then we're moving gradually, again, with our colleagues into phase two, which is really taking the stockpile program to the field, monitoring and evaluation, and showing potential impact on health. So let me dive in very briefly over a couple of the questions I highlighted before. So what is a product we would like to start working with, okay? And what is that first stockpile that we want to work on? So in 2018, WHO issued its first recommendation for the use of a monovalent treatment, a monovalent antivenom, which is Equitab-G. This antivenom was shown to be effective in clinical trials in Nigeria, yet its distribution is still considerably limited, which gives us a very interesting window of opportunity, because if we improve accessibility to this product, there is great potential to have an impact. By using that product, we are obviously covering a set of species. We're covering the Echis group, African carpet vipers, which from a public health perspective and a medical perspective are very relevant, because they are responsible for most envenomings that require hospitalization, as we also heard initially from Professor Habib. Geographically speaking, and I won't go into the details of the map, my colleague Anna Pinter has already vastly covered that, but basically the area that we are going to potentially cover with such a stockpile program is very vast, really covering West African countries, Central African countries, and also East African sub-Saharan countries. We had to start somewhere, and we decided to really pick West and Central Africa first, and then gradually extending as part of a scaling up process to East Africa. So here you can see the key countries that we are already working on. So 8 countries both French-speaking and English-speaking countries with different sizes and also different type of health systems, but basically Benin, Burkina Faso, Cameroon, Chad, Ghana, Nigeria, Niger, and Togo. And we are already actively in touch with different focal points, particularly around the epidemiological work. So as I mentioned now, we're really going to focus on these specific 8 countries in the first phase, and then scaling up and understanding the healthcare accessibility landscape for each of these countries, something that has not yet been done before to our knowledge. And to model accessibility to healthcare, we basically need multiple layers of data, multiple layers of information, integrating them and computing them to understand how they talk to each other and how we can model the travel times to health facilities, right? So I've just highlighted some of the key layers that we are using, the key data layers that we are using to do that exercise. So land cover, obviously, the vegetation, the type of terrain will have an impact on travel times to health facilities. Barriers to movement. Many of you are, active travelers, and you know how challenging it is to go from one place to another in tropical, subtropical African contexts where rivers may simply block your journey, or flooding events, or water bodies, etc. Elevation. Going uphill or downhill is not the same thing. I'm Swiss, I live in Switzerland. I can tell you cycling up is not the same as cycling down, right? Population distribution, health facility coordinates, travel scenarios, and road networks. So we're considering different travel scenarios because the way people move in this type of context can be very different. And I'll give you more details immediately. And road networks. And you also know there is a large diversity of type of roads. So dirt roads or motorways, depending on the countries, and also the quality of the roads, right? Which will again impact travel times to health facilities, to healthcare, and in this case, to accessing antivenoms. Just to illustrate this more specifically, taking Nigeria as an example, you can see here the multiple data layers that we're considering. And I'd like to insist one more time that this multi-dimensional exercise has not, to our knowledge, been done before for all these 8 entries that we're considering here, right? And what we've done is really an iterative process where we're not only considering one data source, but really combining multiple data sources iteratively to come up with the most comprehensive, representative, and granular data points possible, right? So if you take the case of road networks, for example, for Nigeria, we've been using OpenStreetMap as a main source, which is, as you probably know, an open, collaborative, crowdsourcing effort. But we've also combining that with Facebook data, which gave us an additional level of granularity when it comes to really understanding certain areas of the country. Population, for example, we're using World Pop data. Hospitals data, you already heard from Beth, but again, here we're combining different data sources, interacting with the Ministry of Health as well, but again, a multiple iterative process, which we'll keep probably doing over time. Here, we are obviously focusing on specific areas where carpet vipers occur and where the risk is particularly high. And Anna Pinto already showed you this map. I'm simply zooming here into Nigeria, again, as an example, but you can see which are the areas that we predict as areas for risk. And the same type of maps have been done for other countries, right? And this map will be also combined with epidemiological data to really compare and complement what we've predicted with what we hear from health facilities. At the end of the day, we're taking all these different layers I've shown you, and we throw them into this software, this Access Mod 5 software, which is a software that, simplifying the story, basically models travel time to health facilities by combining all these data sources. And it's a software, interestingly, that was, it's a WHO software, it's open, it was co-developed with the University of Geneva, but very interestingly, the beginning of the journey of this software was more maternal health, right? And it was most of the 10 years of existence of this software was application to maternal health in sub-Saharan Africa. And now for the first time, we see the application of this software to other types of health emergencies, including snakebite and venoming. It's been applied already in certain studies in Brazil, also very recently in Nepal, but for the very first time in sub-Saharan African countries. And again, going back to this initial image, with these multiple data layers, with this software, we can now better understand how this person walking to a hospital, how long will the journey take to get to a hospital. And these are the different possibilities that we're considering. So one possibility, as we saw in that image, is walking. which is very frequent, but also a combination of walking and motorized transportation. Often people walk from the village through a single track, but then once they hit the main road, they may get access to an ambulance or a motorbike that will drive them through the main road. And then cycling is also a possibility where the victim may be cycling or simply carried on the bike. Now, let me show you very briefly some very preliminary results. And I took a couple of examples of countries, so Ghana and Nigeria, but the same type of maps are being delivered and produced for all the other countries. So what you see on the left here, right, is travel times to health facilities. And the colored areas are what we call catchment areas. The colors in dark brown are 6 hours travel time to the health facilities. And obviously each of the little dots that you see there are health facilities. Then the more you turn orange and yellow, the lower the travel time. So being in the yellow area, it's good because that requires 1 or 2 hours travel times to reach a health facility. What you see on the right, over there, right, it's really showing you the areas of high risk of carpet viper bites and lower risk. So red and orange are high risk. Red is indicating the areas where not only you are at high risk, but you are also far in terms of travel time. You are beyond 6 hours travel time to the health facility. So you don't really want to be on the red area and probably not on the orange area where still you are at high risk, but accessibility it's better, less than, so you're within that 6 hours travel time. And purple and blue is areas where the risk is lower, right? Interestingly, what I'm showing you here is walking travel mode, but if you now move to a more to another travel scenario, so cycling, you see the map here on the left is turning more yellow. So we have less of those dark brown areas, which is not surprising. And if you now bring the motorized transportation, where again, you might have access to an ambulance or simply to a car that is taken to a hospital, you see almost the entire map for Ghana turns yellow, which is giving us, at least for Ghana, and the landscape when you compare the countries is quite heterogeneous, but at least for Ghana, this sends us a quite promising message, I think, because on the one hand, we see that if patients have access to an ambulance or to a motorized vehicle, and we make sure that antivenoms are available on the facilities, we could definitely save many lives, right? If you look now at Nigeria, and I'm showing you here only the walking plus motorized transportation option here, these type of maps are also pointing to specific gaps and specific problematic areas, or areas at least we need to look into more details. So there is a very high density of hospitals, as you can see in the map in Nigeria. We see that the map is globally quite yellow, which is a good sign, but still there are specific pockets and areas that still appear in dark brown. So the interest here is taking a more, you probably heard this concept of precision public health or precision global health, and having now a much more targeted approach and trying to understand what is really happening in those brown areas and to come up with targeted public health interventions that may solve the problem. So just trying to wrap up. So you heard what I've shown you very briefly. It's just phase 1 of the project, which is still ongoing, but we gradually move into phase 2. And phase 2 is really building on all this analysis, right? And the key next step, which is something we've been doing already, is really engaging more specifically with the countries and showing the results, showing these maps, discussing these maps, giving specific recommendations on how we could define that stockpile program. The idea is having a revolving stockpile program where there will be probably an initial injection from a donor to start the process, but ultimately we expect countries to take the lead and take over ensuring sustainability of the program. And scalability, I think, is a key step, is a key element, both because the whole methodology that we've developed is totally scalable, not only focusing on carpet vipers, because so far what I've shown you is 8 countries in West and Central Africa, but the idea is extending to East Africa as well, but moving to completely other areas of the world as well, and other products, replicating almost exactly the same process. So I'll stop here, and I thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks, Rafael. Questions in the room, Rafael?
Zuhair Amr from Jordan. Do you believe that somebody who's been bitten by, a viper or whatever, can ride a bicycle and go to a health center
Well, indeed, I mean,
or walk even?
I agree. I mean, the different travel scenarios that we consider, that we're trying to cover all the possibilities, and riding a bike may be challenging depending on where the bike occurs. So, but as part of the model, we need to compute all these possibilities. At the same time, some of this, as I mentioned, all these models will be discussed, and all the different scenarios will be discussed with the field as well, where we may refine iteratively what is more or less possible and plausible depending on the real field situation.
Thank you.
I've actually got a question. Rafael, I think the geospatial mapping and the bottom-up approach that Anna described is fantastic. And I saw a similar talk a couple of weeks ago where somebody had done this for the Brazilian Amazon, which is very constrained in terms of travel, right? And what it does tell you is where you could put new medical centers for anti-venom administration. But the problem is many of these countries have constrained health budgets. So how do you then engage with those governments and say, if you put anti-venom here, you save a lot of lives, you decrease morbidity when they have competing interests? What's the approach for doing that?
Yeah, no, and I would add an additional element there is not only one, because when you think about these accessibility situations, one option is, okay, let's build a new center, or let's reorganize things within the existing centers, or even you could say, why don't we improve the roads network, right? So these multiple dimensions could be considered for sure. Again, I think the next step of the process is a critical one, because we've built the foundation now, the analytical process, which may be even theoretical at this stage, conceptual. So it's now the next step when each of these maps will be presented and discussed with each of these 8 countries. And the conversation may go in different ways, depending on the countries, as you said, depending on the budget, depending on the competing priorities with other diseases. I think broadly, our approach at the NTD department is also multi-disease approach. So whatever we do for snakebite and venoming, we'll try to, and the case of rabies, for example, Bernadetta Bellarida, I mean, she's a reference in rabies at WHO, is bringing also whatever we do with snakebite, can it complement or support other diseases? So this multi-dimensional approach will be part of the discussion. But really, the next step of the process where we engage with the country will be critical.
Thank you.
Let me just check online. If you have a question online, please unmute. Go ahead.
Yes, can I ask a question, please?
Yep. Go ahead.
Thank you, Rafael, for your excellent presentation. I like to request you to shed light on 2 areas. One is in most of the countries, there is a very flourishing private sector. Are you planning to engage private sector as well in the management of snakebite? The other point is, in the midst of these various disasters, for example, flooding, what plan we have got to deploy anti-venom and management? Thank you.
Yes, no, that's a good point. And again, I think that's also part of the next step when it comes really to implementation of the program, where we will have a multi-stakeholder approach and engaging with the private sector for the commodities, of course, for the antivenoms, but also more broadly, I think you've mentioned disaster management or flooding, I think you mentioned. So yeah, part of the conversation as well, but not yet.
Okay, is there another question online? If so, please unmute and go ahead. If not, then thanks, Rafael, very much.